Yo, what's going on guys, Arekkz here, welcome back to another Monster Hunter World video, and in this video we are going to be taking a more in-depth look at the new Coral Highlands map. This is of course the map that was revealed in the TGS trailer, and then during the actual show, during Tokyo Game Show, they showed us some more in-depth gameplay. They actually gave us a little walkthrough where they ran through the map, encounter some of the monsters that we will fight here, as well as kind of giving us a look at just the general environment, telling us a bit about it. So in this video, I'm going to recap all of that, tell you guys all the information you need to know, talk a bit about some of these new monsters. We now have some names for them, so plenty of stuff to recap. Of course, if you've missed any of the other TGS coverage, then I have videos covering things like character creation, weapon and armor upgrading, crafting, also some Hubtown gameplay, so you actually get to see the town of Astera, as well as the training room, loads of stuff. So I've linked a few videos down below for you guys to catch up in case you've missed any of those. But in this video, we're going to focus on Coral Highlands. So if you do enjoy this, then like would be super appreciated. Comment down below if you have any questions. But to begin with, since we are at this point in the gameplay, we might as well speak about one of the new monsters that we now have a name for. This blue raptor looking monster, this bird wyvern, is called Tzitzi-Ya-Ku. It is a relative of Kulu-Ya-Ku, who is of course the desert one that we've seen in the Wildspire Waste map. But this monster here, of course, has a unique feature or a unique kind of ability. It has this thing on its head. You just saw there. If I rewind very quickly, you can of course see it has the ability to flash and blind both monsters and the hunter as well. It's very similar to Gypceros. For those of you guys that are new to the series that perhaps haven't played Monster Hunter before, Gypceros is a wyvern with effectively a crystal on its head that can flash, and then it blinds everyone in this big radius. And of course, if you get blinded, then you're stuck in this sort of stars in your eyes animation for a minute where you need to wiggle your analog stick to try and break free. So you definitely want to watch out for that. However, Tzitzi-Ya-Ku's flash is much more in a kind of cone in front of it, so it's actually a lot easier to dodge than Gypceros. You can either just look away from it, or as you can clearly see from that gameplay, it flashed and there was kind of a very clear delineation as to where the flash actually lied, so you could even stand behind it and just not get affected. You can use that to bring down the other sort of wyverns around it, and it can then eat on those. But similarly, again, if you get caught in that, then you're definitely going to want to try and sort of get out of that as quickly as possible. Now, again, for those of you guys new to the series, these monsters, these bird wyverns, these kind of raptor-looking creatures, are typically the monsters you fight much earlier in the game. They are effectively your beginner monsters. They don't normally present much of a challenge. They are basically the game's way of sort of easing you into the game. You can then fight them, you can make armor from them to give you a basic armor set to get you started, and you can then go off and fight bigger and, more fearsome monsters. However, that being said, based on the way this looks and based on the kind of horns on its head, I'm pretty certain, it hasn't been confirmed officially, but I am pretty certain that this is the armor set that belongs to this monster. And if that is the case, then I'm so incredibly excited, because for me personally, I've never been a huge fan of the sort of starter armor sets, the ones you get from these types of monsters. But this looks so awesome. This almost looks like Sub-Zero with the face mask. But yeah, if that comes from this monster, then getting my first armor set early on is going to be so cool. However, that being said, not a great deal more to say about this monster at this stage, so while they then walk into the next area, might as well take this time to talk about the actual map itself. So the Coral Highlands is a high altitude area that has a similar kind of appearance to the sea. Again, reminder, this is not underwater despite the way that it looks. This is actually an area that was formed by terrestrial coral, and it basically gives the sort of vibrant appearance that you would expect from the ocean. There is no underwater combat in Monster Hunter World, so this is just sort of like a coral reef looking map, but you are very much grounded in the process. The coral itself uses wind currents to reproduce, and you're then able to ride those wind currents using your glider mantle. This is something I mentioned before. This is something we haven't been able to do in the previous maps, because in the Ancient Forest and in Wildspire Waste, sure, you can jump off a ledge and use the glider mantle to fly around, but you can't actually ride the wind. Whereas in this map, there are these turrets that you can ride pretty high, which is really useful because, of course, if you want to get to the higher elevations, instead of doing the usual thing where you go and find a wall and you climb the vines or you climb the rocks and whatnot, you can basically just jump on the wind, fly up to wherever it takes you, and then that's kind of a shortcut around the map. So that's pretty cool. You will, of course, see other organisms around here like eels and floating jellyfish and barnacles, basically the kind of things you would find in the sea, but obviously they're just living in this vibrant new environment. I do honestly love the way this map looks. It's probably one of the most striking maps I've ever seen in Monster Hunter history. It's just so bright, so colourful, a distinct contrast to the Ancient Forest and Wildspire Waste, which you've seen up until now, which, typically use quite muted colour palettes, browns, greens, beiges and stuff, so this is very nice to see. However, you'll of course see in the gameplay at the moment, they're taking the pit stop right here. You can see that you can eat your meals whilst you're at the base camp. So I mentioned this in the Hubtown video, but if you forget to eat before you go out and you're like, oh no, I needed to get the buff, you can go to any of the base camps, you can sit down at the tables and you can order your food there, so you can still get your buffs. They still work the same way as before, whereby if you get a food buff, say it gives you attack up small and you then die, you will lose that food buff, but that is of course still your option. They then dive into the base camp, so they started off using Light Bowgun, they then switched over to the Insect Glaive. We do get a look at a new armor set for the Palico, kind of cool. It's just sort of like what I assume to be a bog standard plate mail armor set. I don't know what monster it comes from yet. It could just be one of those ones that you get quite early in the game, but again, it's a set we haven't seen before, so we can add that to the list of new Palico gear. But next on the agenda, they're then heading off to find the next monster, which is the fluffy balloon-looking bat, which actually goes by the name of Paolumu. This is another monster that typically inhabits the Coral Highlands, and it basically has a special air sac in its neck that it can inflate into this big balloon, and then it allows the monster to float in the air. Now, when it does this, it of course makes it a lot harder for melee-focused hunters to hit because it's off the ground, so that's typically where you would then lean into things like your slinger. You can use, red pits or stones to fire at it. You can fire things like poison knives or paralysis knives or even flash bombs. Anything like that, you're going to use those to kind of typically bring it down, or of course, if you are a gunner, then you can just use that to your advantage. The main thing about this is that when it's in balloon mode, because it obscures a lot of its body, it also masks a lot of its attacks, so it's kind of unpredictable when you do that. You don't necessarily know exactly what it's going to do, so this is where you are, technically speaking, more vulnerable, because, once it kind of goes into attack, you might get hit by some of those surprise attacks.
でも可愛いっていう。
はい。まあなので総中根とかね結構相性はいいと思います。ね。やっぱ。おいしょ。乗りました。
乗るとですねこうやって空気を吐き出させることができるので、
はい。
まあ有利ですねこのモンスター。おっともしかして。
落ちちゃうと結構扱いやすいモンスターなんで、そこら辺が結構攻略的な感じですかね。はい。落ちるかな。
今乗り状態ですが。
よいしょ。
行けー。
よいしょ。
ね怒らせたいんですよ。ちょっともう攻撃しますね。もう
怒らせるとこまで行きますか。
I will say this is definitely one of the coolest, more different monsters we've seen up until now. I just really like the fur texture on the body. It looks really, really awesome, especially once it like puffs up into a balloon. But another thing worth calling out as well, actually we saw just before this part, was this section here. This is basically how you'll catch bugs and things like that. Now you have a net in your slinger, an infinite net, which you can then equip, and you basically then go around, you can fire this at different things like the jellyfish or flies or dragonflies or beetles or anything you see basically around the map that you would typically gather normally. You can then do that through your net now. So this is of course another way to gather. Something else we saw in the TGS gameplay back when they were in the Ancient Forest, but that also applies in this map, is the ability to ride some of those winged wyverns as shortcuts around the map. So you'll see these floating wyverns here. You can then bring them down to your level, you can hook onto them with your slinger, and they will then fly you down sort of a predetermined path to get you to the next part of the map. And with that in mind, that then brings us to the top of the map, and this is where you'll find Legiana, who is this big, what I originally called praying mantis / dragon monster. Basically, this is Legiana. It is the apex predator in this map, so to speak. It will trump Paolumu, it'll of course trump Tzitzi-Ya-Ku, and in that kind of monster hierarchy, this is basically where, if you wanted to, you would lead Paolumu because Legiana will then destroy it. It is a monster that feeds on other wyverns around it. It's also very hostile, so anything that basically comes into the top elevation of the Coral Highlands, anything that kind of comes into its territory will get attacked. So it is a more vicious monster, and it also uses some ice element attacks. So this is the monster that at first I wasn't too sure, but having now seen it from different angles, I'm almost like 99% sure this is probably the armor set that belongs to this monster, because if you look at the head, when it's lower down, you see this sort of antennas on it that basically matches up with this gear. So pairing that with the fact that the female version had this sort of white cape that looks similar to that monster, I'm pretty sure this is where that comes from.
全然こっち見てくんないですね。もうやばいやばい。モンスター同士が激しすぎて。
はい。この子が主でまあ
逃げていきましたね攻撃されて。
はい。まあかなり高台からこのエリアを見張ってて、まあああいう装飾とかも捕食してるんですけど、群れを見かけるとこう一気に降下して捕食してくるっていう。なので。逆に言うとこうおびき寄せるっていうことですね。この装飾とかをここに群れで持ってこれると、こいつをおびき寄せることができるっていう。はい。こんな感じかな。あんまり見せすぎる。あんまり見せすぎるとね、この子僕たちもネタなくなっていくから。あんまり。
So that is pretty much it for the time being. Of course, they've only explored like a small area of the Coral Highlands. There's, these maps are massive, there's plenty of space to explore, there's plenty more stuff to do, but given their focus here was to try and sort of show the three different tiers of monsters, so to speak, your kind of ground level, your mid level, and then your top level, then that is a quick look at the Coral Highlands. Definitely one of the more striking maps I've ever seen, definitely one of the coolest new maps. So right now, that brings the total up to 3. We've of course seen the Ancient Forest, Wild Spire Waste, and Coral Highlands. If you guys saw my video the other day talking about the hub, in the research corner there appear to be 3 more slots, so there could well be 3 other maps, so hopefully, if this is anything to go by, we could have some other really exciting maps. I'd almost like it if they kind of do go completely different. You know, while in Monster Hunter history we would expect to see, say, like a volcano or like a tundra, I wouldn't mind if they do something very different if they're, you know, as striking and kind of different as this. So anyway, for the time being, that's pretty much it. That's the gameplay we have. That was a look at the Coral Highlands. If you guys have any questions, by all means drop them down below. There is still some more stuff I do want to cover from TGS. We do have that in-depth look at character creation. I showed you guys a little bit the other day, but they did kind of a longer stream where they showed really minute details, things like face tattoos, eyes, you know, palico markings and stuff. So I will do that later on this week. But for the time being, that is pretty much it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Take it easy. Catch you next time. Peace out.